Welcome back to another episode of Sabbath School Boot Camp. We are once again studying the book of Genesis with this here adult Bible study guide, and I'm joined once again by Jim Merrills, elder extraordinaire up in Michigan. I said it this time, got it out.
Yeah.
I was practicing before we got on here. It's kind of like Gollum in Lord of the Rings. I'm just trying to get it like Gollum. I'm trying to get it on my throat. Anyways. Okay, so we are actually not talking about Abraham this week. That is a surprise because we've done the last 3 weeks on Abraham. And now we are finally going to talk about Isaac. I'm just kidding. We're talking about Jacob because Isaac does not exist in the Bible. And what I mean by that is like we you have all these chapters with Abraham looking forward to the son of promise, trying to circumvent God's plan and do it himself. All of these things that Abraham is doing. And it's like, finally, Abraham is gone, Sarah's gone. Now is it Isaac's time to shine? There is one story in the Bible where Isaac is the main character here after his father and mother's death. And and it's basically a repeat story, a recapitulation of this old story where there's a famine in the land. Isaac wants to go down to Egypt. God tells him, no, we've done this before. So Isaac instead goes to the Philistines and tells them that Rebecca is his sister, not his wife. And that's it. Like, that's the one story where he's the main character, which is incredible because you think everything from chapter 12 onward has been about Isaac. So he's kind of an invisible character. He obviously plays a role in the Jacob and Esau story when he's older, but really by that point the focus is on Jacob and even Esau to a greater extent than Isaac. Isaac's just kind of there to be fooled. And so anyways, just to get you guys up to date here, Abraham and Sarah, they're dead. As I mentioned, Isaac has married Rebecca. Rebecca is childless. Again, another theme in these patriarchal stories. But this time Isaac prays for his wife. We have no record that Abraham prayed for Sarah when they couldn't have a kid. I mean, maybe he did, but it's just not recorded. And this prayer works, and Rebecca becomes pregnant, and she has twins, and that's what brings us to Jacob and Esau. Anything you want to say on Saturday, or shall we move to Sunday?
Yeah, I'm reminded of an old detective movie or TV series where they said something about the names were changed or something. I mean, it just seems like we're reliving the same stories over and over, but we just keep on changing the names. So let's go for it.
All right, let's go for it. Okay, so we're going to, I guess, get rid of that there. We don't need that. And we're going to head over to Sunday here. Okay, so we're talking about Jacob and Esau. I mentioned all that stuff about Isaac because if you are wondering where in the world Isaac went, that's where he went. He's just not really in here. So we have Rebecca's pregnant with twins. She seems to sense that something is wrong with this pregnancy, and I imagine having twins would definitely feel different. I've never experienced it. I don't know about you, Jim. But she says, why is this happening to me? Which I think is probably something that every pregnant woman has asked. and this time God answers her and explains that she's going to have twins. Not just twins, not just two human beings, but two nations are within her. And that's why she's struggling here. So this is God as your OB, doing like an ultrasound and letting her know what this pregnancy is going to be like. I always think it's fascinating what God chooses to show up for and what he doesn't in the book of Genesis. Shows up for destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, shows up for the Tower of Babel, shows up for this. Shows up, I guess, in a way on Mount Moriah with Abraham and Isaac. But there's plenty of times he doesn't show up, like when there's famine in the land and they're like, what do we do? What are we going to eat? It doesn't seem like he shows up in those stories. Although he did show up with Isaac telling him not to go to Egypt, but that's it. So it's always interesting what he shows up for and what he doesn't. I don't know if there's always if there's some kind of like lesson we can learn from these appearances, or if it's just his inscrutable will. But I just find that interesting. Okay. I've talked long enough, Jim. Stop giving me the silent treatment here. What do you got on Sunday?
Well, the word deja vu comes to mind here. I
Yeah,
mean, again, we have two sons. We have apparently the not ideal parenting. We've got well, how else
it's
shall I
true.
say it?
It's true.
Um, it is true. We have the rise of anger. We have a warring of two brothers, so to speak. We've got the potential of death. We've got the fleeing. We've got the exile. Have we not read this story before?
We have. We've read it before, just different names to protect the innocent
Yeah.
or the guilty.
And
Yeah.
yet, from story to story, we're still talking about these are the people, these are the men of faith, these are the women of
Yeah.
faith. So I suppose the one good news in this is that it's like, wow, they didn't catch on. They didn't catch on. Generation after generation, they didn't catch on. Maybe that's exactly the hope that we need to hear for ourselves.
Yeah.
If God can work with these people and through these generations over and over, there is hope for all of us.
There has to be, man. There has to be. But this is the really intriguing thing because there is some. I don't want to say there's some lessons learned, but there's certainly some different paths taken, right? Isaac, instead of course, we're not in that chapter yet. It'll be in chapter 26. But Isaac, instead of going to Egypt, goes to the Philistines. This is a huge improvement. But at least he's still within the promised land, right? He's like, technically, I'm still in the land that God has given me, even if this particular spot has been given to somebody else. But he tells the same lie, and it's still the same idea of getting away from the spot that God had planted him and telling a lie to save his own life. But I think something is much more serious here. I mean, we see Abraham and Sarah being schemers. That's definitely true. But I think something more serious has happened with Rebekah and Isaac that we just are not told about, because when we have both sons here that are born, we have, the Bible spends a few verses here, as you can see, contrasting them. Esau is red or ruddy, I guess. This is really a play on words because Edom means red. And so Esau is the father of the Edomites. And so it's explaining why they're called that. He's very hairy, and his brother doesn't say whether he's hairy or not, but presumably less hairy. And anyways, one likes the tents, one likes the field, all those sort of things. But it says Isaac, who had a taste for wild game here, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And so that's why I wonder what happened with Isaac and Rebekah. I mean, so many Christian fiction authors love to talk about the love story of Isaac and Rebekah. And yet, I think when you have a family situation where one child, well, I shouldn't say this. It's not that Esau loved Isaac. It's that Isaac loved Esau. The parents have each picked their child to bestow their affections upon. We all are going to admit we have favorite children. I'm going to ask you which is your favorite. But you love them both, right? Like, you love them both. There's just one that maybe is a little bit closer to you than the other. But you love them both. But here it's like, I don't want to read too much into it, but it definitely seems that each parent picked their favorite child to the exclusivity of the other. And that's not a functional home environment at all.
Yeah, I mean, this rang all the way back to Eve. When we talked about Cain and Abel, and Abel is like not even in the picture. Name isn't mentioned, and here we go again. So I'll tell you, if there is one thing that really stands out in story after story here, is issues about parenting.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go there?
Yeah, it's but we're not told what exactly happened. It starts off so well, but this is not good. Is there a huge age gap? I mean, we're told that Isaac is 60 when Rebekah gave birth to them. Rebekah presumably is much younger. Isaac, it seems, I don't know what they were thinking, but it wasn't until his mom died. Isaac was about 37 when Abraham's like, we got to find him a wife. And then it seems that they got married or whatever, about 40 or so, and waited. And this was 20 years of being able to have children. So he's 60, not as old as his dad was when he was born, of course. But maybe there's a huge age gap, and Isaac is like, hey, I've got my kids now. I'm checking out, or I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. All we can do is read into the silence here and try to understand why. The implication, I think, is that Esau just takes after his dad more, and Jacob takes after his mom more. But we didn't know that about Isaac beforehand, that he was a hunter or liked being out in the field or whatever. So this is all news to us.
Yeah, and it's like you brought up already. You start off with this wonderful love story, with this couple. And then once the kids come into the picture, all of a sudden we have some real issues here.
Yeah,
I'm trying to bite my tongue so I don't run ahead of you here, but
go for it.
I'm looking. Well, okay. So here's a statement that Dukan had in his companion book to the lesson that I just thought was really, really insightful and powerful, and it really speaks, or should speak, to us today. He says, quote, Rebecca refers to her own conviction, and that would be of prophecy, because she knows what God's will is. Okay. So he says, Rebecca refers to her own conviction. She knows the blessing of Jacob is God's will, but she attempts to change the prophetic course of events as planned by God. We see so many times in Scripture, we've seen it already in stories. We'll see it later in the New Testament with, let's say, Judas and Peter. But how often do we move ahead of God or rush God because we know something to be his will, we know something to be part of prophecy, and we are going to make this happen. We are going to help God.
Yeah, sure.
And I could not help, as I thought about this and I was thinking about what Dukan wrote, I could not help but think, as Seventh-day Adventist and, let's say, an end-time issue like the Sunday Law, boy, oh boy, I have seen so many examples of individuals wanting to see God's word fulfilled, and man, we can do some real damage running ahead of God or trying to force him in the ways that we think he should be doing things.
But you're saying that prophecy in verse 23 is what Rebecca is clinging on to and trying to kind of bring it to fulfillment. We don't know exactly how she's trying to bring it. I mean, she will later help. I see what you're saying, pointing forward. She's going to help Jacob deceive Isaac and steal the birthright, thinking that that's maybe the path forward. Very, very, or the blessing, I should say, not the birthright. That's very distinctly possible. Maybe Isaac spoils his firstborn because his dad spoiled him, and his other sibling, I mean, he wasn't his firstborn, right? But he was the one who was spoiled, the child of promise. And his brother, Ishmael, was kind of ignored and sent away. And so maybe that's because that's the way that's the way Isaac was raised. Maybe that's how he's raising Jacob and Esau, where it's kind of like the second one is less important because he's not the first. He's not the he's not my heir. My heir is the one that matters. The others are, whatever, just kind of backups or something. Maybe you have some of these dynamics coming to play here. Again, these are human beings, and as faithful as they may be in their time, they're still human beings, and we ought not idealize them in every respect, I should say. So it is interesting. Now, the lesson wants us to compare and contrast these qualities. Of course, you guys can do that, I think, in your class. Of course, a lot of this is all of this is written after the fact, but a lot of this is analyzed after the fact. I mean, what does being hairy mean? Is that necessarily a sign that you're going to be rough? I don't know. it's hard to understand the weight that the original audiences would have placed on all of these characteristics. It's certainly an omen when the brother comes out grasping Esau's heel, like he's trying to hold him back. You know what I mean? And he's trying to. He wanted to be first, and he's trying to pull Esau back, but wasn't able to. Sure, why not? All right, I'm ready to go on to Monday. How about you, sir?
Well, I'll conclude with this thought for Sunday. You have a brother who at one point says, hey, this brother of mine was rightly named Jacob because he supplanted me. I did not realize this until I had moved to Germany, that the name James comes from the name Jacob. And it wasn't until I was in Germany, I'm looking at a German Bible, and it's like, the book of James is not the book of James. The book of James is the book of Jacobus. Yeah. And so, unfortunately, I wasn't real pleased when I came to realize that the name James really has this kind of a little bit unfortunate background here about being a supplanter. So, once again, we have a name that really, we're going to be seeing a name change here in a little bit to Israel, right? But you start off with, you're the supplanter, you're the bad one. So once again, we just see how powerful a name can be in the scriptures.
Yeah. Also, who names their kid Supplanter?
I know.
What's wrong with you?
Hey. They're still naming them Jacob and James. So go figure.
But with no awareness of what the name actually, you know what I mean? Like, it's just because it sounds good. It's historic at this point. Look, Esau comes out and they're like, I guess he's kind of red. The other one, he was grabbing a heel. You're a heel grabber. He's like, what are these? Yeah. Come on, guys. Don't you guys have a list of baby names that you guys work through? Goodness gracious. All right.
Now,
moving.
It is possible. It is possible that some children were simply named, and it's later in the writings of Moses or by the Hebrews and such that there comes more of an understanding of what these names mean.
Yeah, maybe.
I doubt if my mother had any idea what James or Jacob meant when I was named. I'm sure it was just because they liked the plumber and that was it. So who knows?
I have no further questions, Your Honor. Let's go on to Jacob's ladder. we need a ladder to get out of here. All right. We're going over Genesis 28 now. So we're skipping ahead a few chapters. Here we go. Okay. So let's see what happened here. We really made a jump here in the narrative over to chapter 28. But anyways, I'm really kind of surprised they didn't spend much time here talking about the deception. But I do agree with Dukan that it's a dysfunctional family, to be sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. But anyways, yes, in chapter 25 is when Jacob steals the birthright. And then he, of course, will work with his mother to conspire to steal his father's blessing in chapter 27. And that leads to him being on the run. After spending 3 weeks on Abraham, I'm really surprised we're skipping over like the two key early stories in Jacob's life, with the stealing of the birthright and then stealing of the blessing. But we focused on their characteristics when they were born. But if you want to cover that as a teacher in the class, it might not be a bad thing to refresh people's memory on what happened in those stories, is all I'm going to say. I think we kind of jumped ahead a little bit here because now he's on the run, right?
Yeah, and what you bring out is important for the very fact that here we're going to have through Jacob the lineage of the Messiah. So, we can't ignore the blessing, being given to the son. But how sad that it had to come with lies and deception.
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't. It would have come another way. Or perhaps. I guess this just goes back to how we understand that prophecy. is it a prophecy in terms of what God willed to happen, or was it a prophecy basically on what would end up happening? You know
You
what I
open up
mean?
that can of worms.
Yeah, we don't want to go back to it now, but I'm just saying it's there's a difference between the two, right? In Daniel
Yeah.
2, we see a rise and fall of kingdoms. That doesn't necessarily mean that God chose Persia to, I mean, we know the prophecy about Cyrus, but I mean, it's not that, he wanted to choose Greece to beat Persia or whatever. It's just, this is going to happen. This is how it's going to happen. The whole point is, in the end, this is my will for my kingdom to conquer these other kingdoms. But, is it his permissive will or his decree? I don't know. Anyways, we see here Isaac calls for Jacob and blessed him. He told him, do not marry a Canaanite woman. This is a family command, and I understand why they have this command. But all I'm saying is, in terms of marriage relationships so far in this family, I mean, it's not like you guys found the Garden of Eden here, and you're like, please keep going back to the Garden of Eden, okay? You guys... I don't mean to be disrespectful to Sarah or Rebecca, okay? But the relationships are not the best in this family.
Yeah.
Might want to think outside the box a little bit. Like, maybe don't go marry a Canaanite and take a relationship, test and get some counseling before you get married or something. Just try something else here. So anyways, this is the reason why this detail is added is because he's meant to go to his family, to Laban, to his uncle, and find a wife there. Can you imagine showing up on his doorstep? It's like, hey, I'm Jacob. Cool. Why are you here? Well, I'd hope to get married. Do you have any women around here? Awkward conversation to say the least. Anyways, so Jacob then goes and he listens. And he goes to Laban, right? And it says in verse 8 here that Esau then realized how displeasing the Canaanite women were to his father Isaac. So he went to Ishmael, and I guess they all knew where Ishmael was at this time, and married Mahalath, the sister, blah, 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 daughter of Ishmael, son of Abraham, in addition to the wives he already had. So Esau... doesn't listen to his father, despite the fact that he was the one his father loved. I guess he feels betrayed, right? And he just makes a point out of flaunting that disobedience in his father's face. Mm-hmm. So, ouch. So this is when we see this pivoting between Jacob and Esau. Before this point, you might feel that Esau is a dolt, but he's not a bad guy. Jacob is the crook here, and now we see this shift happening, where Esau is like, wow, that was a really mean, cruel thing to do, just to go spite your father. And Jacob is now going to have this experience with God, and that's where we see this change taking place in these characters.
It does beg the question. I mean, thinking of Jacob and Esau, how Jacob's supposed to be this goody two-shoes, he's spiritually minded, or at least more so than his brother and all this. Yet he's the one who, along with his mother, resorts to deception and lies. And then you have Esau and how he feels. And it's like, there's something to say here about what can happen in a church when the people that maybe we look up to fail us, and the influence that can have on others in the church that are not as strong spiritually. And
yeah.
Kind of deep.
Yeah, absolutely. I find this lesson is just, there's so much all over the place, and you really could focus. You could really focus on just, their birth, and day 2. Monday could have been the birthright. Tuesday could have been the blessing. You could have, and it could have ended it here with Jacob's ladder. But that's what we have to deal with here. And so, anyways, teach the class however you want to teach the class, okay? If you want to focus on those things, focus on those things. But here we have this vision, or this dream that Jacob has. He's out sleeping out in the ground, and he has this dream of a stairway. We call it Jacob's ladder, but, I mean, you don't climb up and down a ladder at the same time. And, it reaches up to heaven. And I think, man, Dukan asked this really perceptive question on this day when he says, how is Bethel different than Babel? That's a really good question. And I think the difference here is that we see a ladder, a stairway to heaven, to, just like they tried to do with Babel. But human beings didn't build it. God built it. And that's the real key thing here is it's our job just to recognize what God has done, not our job to build something, in order to get to where God is and take it for ourselves. Jacob, to his credit, recognizes this. He says, surely the Lord is in this place and I was not aware of it. And I think in the final judgment, we're going to be saying that over and over and over again about moments in our lives where we didn't realize God was involved, or that he was around us. And that awareness of God's presence is something we try to cultivate as believers, to recognize him in situations and in places, because he's doing stuff. He's not just sitting on his chair, while we live our lives. He's doing things. He's coming up and down, so to speak, going here and there. He's at work. And so, anyways, he says, this is none other than the house of God. It is the gate of heaven, which of course Babel means the gate of the gods, right? So this is the parallel there to Genesis 11.
Yeah, and I like this because with Babel, you have man attempting to ascend, and we too ascend. We sing the song, "We are climbing Jacob's ladder." Okay,
yeah.
But the ladder does not have its source from below; it has its source from above.
That's right. That's right. We need God to come down. It's not about bringing ourselves up. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's move on to Tuesday. We got to make some tracks here because I don't know where all the time went, honestly. Okay, we're in Genesis chapter 29 here. Why don't you lead us through the story, what's happening here in Genesis 39 briefly with Laban. What's going on with Jacob and Laban?
And I just want to throw in one last point to the last day.
Okay, go for it.
Well, and that is that I just wanted to point out, once he has this vision, he makes that vow the following day that this shall be the place of God's house. And in that prophetic statement of his, he is pointing future to the day in which the temple sanctuary will be built. And it'll be built particularly for the northern kingdom, but that will be the place of the future temple sanctuary. Okay, yes. And on to Tuesday. What was your question?
Run us through the Jacob and Laban story real quick here. What's going on in Genesis 29?
Well, this proves, does it not, that love at first sight is okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I get all of my relationship wisdom from Genesis. Everyone has a great relationship in Genesis. The person who has the best relationship is Joseph. We never hear from his wife, so no comment.
Oh my. Keep going.
No. That's all I want to say. I want you to. All right, so we have this story here where Jacob shows up in Padam Aram, and all these flocks are gathered here. This is kind of a reversal of the Rebecca story where Abraham's servant went to go find her. Now he's going to find the woman. And he meets these shepherds. This is a very common experience in the Pentateuch, it seems. Moses will do something similar in Midian. And, anyways, he gives them some advice on the flocks, and they realize this guy is a sheep whiz kid. and we need some help. And here we have Rachel. Rachel comes out with sheep because it says, for she was a shepherd. I don't think it was entirely uncommon for women to be shepherds, but it seems like it was worthy of note here that the daughter would be a shepherd. And anyway, so he goes over and helps, like every good church boy, when he sees a pretty girl, picks up like 15 chairs when they're picking up a room and moves them over to the side, and tries to, what does he do? He rolls a stone away from the mouth of the well in order to water the sheep, right?
And something here that I appreciated from Dukan was when he's we look at the story, we say, hey, here's love at first sight, one of those kind of romances, but he makes this statement that I think is very, very important. He states that there is religious and prophetic significance in the two of them coming together and so much so that this immediately follows the Bethel experience. So we should not just look at this as, hey, this guy just saw this woman, laid eyes on her, and that was it. He has gone through the latter experience. He has gone through the Bethel experience. His eyes are set correctly. There appears to be a changing of character going on here, and so there's more to it here when he meets this woman.
Well, it does say in verse 11, it's like he just meets her, and then it says, and then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. I think that's an awesome reaction to your first kiss. Was it consensual? I don't know. One presumes they felt mutually about each other, but then I love that he begins to weep aloud. I mean, the poor Rachel, like, what does she think is actually happening here? I don't know.
Right.
Until he explains, at least. So she runs and tells her father that, hey, this boy at the well just kissed me, and before you murder him, he's a relative, just so you know. Right, so he's excited, I guess, because you don't get a lot of guys around here. And right, says, you are my own flesh and blood. Now we know the story of Jacob and Laban. Like he says, hey, you can marry my daughter and work 7 years because you're the sheep whiz kid. And then the trick that Laban pulls on him. And then he has to work another 7 years for Rachel. So that's his way. Laban seems to be hard-pressed to find suitors for his daughter. So he's like, I'm going to marry both of them to the same guy. So he ends up becoming a polygamist, not willingly or not intentionally, I should say. But Jacob becomes a polygamist like his brother. I shouldn't say like his brother, but his brother's also a polygamist, just for different reasons. But yes, Jacob gets deceived. It seems to be a family trait. And turnabout is fair play, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I had this question go through my mind: was Esau's prayers answered?
Yeah, right. Was Esau's prayers answered?
Yeah.
I mean, look,
he got his due.
We talk about this being a deception, and it was, but I mean, the deception, like the come about or the turnabout is that he ends up being married to two women. It's not, and that does bring him some grief, but it's not like, a rock fell on his leg and he was crippled for the rest of his life. It's not like, somebody died. It's not like, I mean.
Matthew, now let's be honest. Would you rather be crippled or married to two women? Come on.
Is my wife watching?
She's only one.
Crippled. I'd rather be crippled. Okay, I'd rather be crippled. I'm surprised you survived. Yeah, that's right. All of those things. Never would want to marry two women. Anyway, I'm just saying, as far as punishments go, there's a lot worse punishments in the Bible. Okay, and we need to make some tracks. We're gonna move over to Wednesday real quick. So he works his 7 years. We go to the bottom half of chapter 29 here, and it's starting in verse 31, it looks like, for this day. And it says, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive. Again, another woman in these stories who cannot have children. And it seems that, of course, Jacob never wanted to marry her. It's not her fault that she's in this relationship. And once again, we see God blessing somebody who is the victim of other people's schemes. We see him blessing Ishmael and Hagar. We see him blessing Leah here, who, through no fault of her own, is in this marriage with somebody that she may not have wanted to marry. And so God blesses him. But you also see this whole idea that Jacob didn't love Leah. Now, undoubtedly, he was, he had eyes for Rachel, and, so it's kind of understandable in a certain sense. But, coming from his family where his dad loved one of the kids and his mom loved one of the kids, we see he's coming from a background where you just kind of pick your favorite and, and you invest everything in them. And God's like, that's not right. So if he's not going to love you, I'm going to love you. And I think that's a beautiful solution to this problem.
Well, what I do find fascinating here is that we now come down through his sons. We come down now to those tribes that are going to be the ancestors of God's people. And
Yeah.
I think it's important for our listeners to understand that as we continue to go through the Old Testament all the way into Revelation, okay, I got to use the word Revelation at least
I know.
once.
I was waiting for it.
All right. So we go all the way into Revelation. We come to Revelation 7, and in Revelation 7, we read about the 12 tribes of Israel. This goes all the way back to here and now. These are the children that are now coming from Jacob, and these will be the 12 that will be spoken of till the end of scriptures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. With some variation, because some of the tribes in Revelation are different from the tribes earlier, right? I think
Yes,
something's destroyed.
You bring up a good point, and we even need to take note of the fact that even before the days of Jesus walking on the earth, we already have the 10 tribes to the north who have been overcome by the Assyrians. They've gone through the diaspora and such. So yes, there's a lot of modification here.
Yes. Indeed. So we see God. Go ahead.
I'll throw in one more thing here because we're eventually going to hit Judah here through was it Rachel? No, it was Leah. We're going to hit Judah, and Judah is going to be the one from which the Messiah comes. So again, when we come to Revelation and we read there about the lion from the tribe of Judah, this is going all the way back to the sons here of Jacob.
Yes, indeed. I like, and just I'm going to put this as delicately as possible. I like how even though Jacob didn't love Leah, she still had a lot of children. You know what I mean? So that's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
Don't know how that happened. But anyways, so she's having these children, and it says that when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, like she too is not having any children. Like, what is going on in Genesis with women in fertility? She became jealous of her sister. So she says to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." And you think, this is not an emotionally stable environment. As if it's all Jacob's doing, right? Like, give it to me or else, I want children. It's like his choice or something, And so what does she do? What's her solution? Here's my servant. Sleep with my servant so I can build a family through her. And it's like, I would imagine this is a fairly common practice to solve infertility issues back then. I don't think Sarah invented this with Hagar. I don't think Rachel invented this with Bilhah. I'm sure this was kind of a conventional wisdom, but it's not God's wisdom. So, and Jacob, like Grandpa, just go ahead and sleeps with her because he apparently has no agency in these stories at all. And so Leah will eventually do the same thing with her servant Zilpah, and here they are. When the prophecy was that 2 nations are in your womb, they really were in a hurry to build those nations. That's for sure. They don't mess around here. And so, anyways, and it goes down and down and down. You get the idea. They have a lot of kids in this passage. And so Dukan asks in the lesson, how are we to understand the meaning of what takes place here? And I don't know. It's like, what lessons are you going to walk away with from this?
Probably none that you want to propose publicly.
Yeah. I mean, what lessons are you going to walk away with? If you find, heaven forbid, you find, somebody's watching and you're trying to have children, you find your spouse, one of you is infertile. This is not the way right here. Okay. Let's make that one abundantly clear. This is not the way. But I do like people do still wrestle with infertility, of course, and it is a deeply personal issue. I know that it can really put a serious strain on a relationship as people try to find ways to get around it, and to overcome it. And I think those folks can really wrestle with these stories, right? Because it's ruining relationships here between family. it's causing all sorts of disasters when now we're just throwing servants at Jacob, and you hope that he just this guy who's like the schemer in these other stories. I just love how he's so passive in this story, just like Abraham was. Like he has no opinion, he has no will. I mean, come on, dude. Anyway, so
no wonder how many times this boy heard you're just like your grandpa.
You're right. I don't know. One wonders. You go and wonder what God thinks when he's just up in heaven. Like, seriously, these people.
Yeah.
And yet, this is the family I'm working with, right? This is the family I've got to work with. So, anyways, Rachel feels jealous. We all have a natural disposition, I think, to side with Rachel because she's the one who was loved, and they kissed when they first met, and all these kind of things. And Leah kind of got thrown into the situation. But Rachel isn't not a saint here either. Her getting jealous of her sister is what leads to her throwing her servant at Jacob. And that's not a good motivation. That's not a good plan here either. But there's just a lot of these characters who are not the main characters in these stories in Genesis who really shine, who you really feel for. Again, talking about Hagar, talking about Ishmael, talking about the servants here, talking about Leah here. People who are kind of, they seem like they're just to the periphery of what's going on, but they're hugely important. And it's how our schemes wreck other people's lives and hurt people. It's there. So eventually Jacob leaves. We're on Thursday. We got to wrap this thing up. He deceived, the lesson points out, he deceived his father and his brother. And now he's going to, he's going to take care of Laban too. And he's going to try to get out of here. It's down in the end of Genesis 30 here. He's got his family now. He's got his wives. And what happens? It says, after Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you. In other words, you've given me wives, you've given me children through those wives, and I've worked for you. So we're square, Laban. We're square. There's a sense that this was kind of a business transaction. It's not just a, hey, come on over and hang out with us, and if you want to marry this girl and go home, go for it. There's some business that's being done here, even though they're family. These ledgers got to be square in the end. And Laban's like, no, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. You learned by divination? How would you learn by opening your dang eyes, Laban? Because you got a lot of sheep now. I just like, what is going on here? After all these 14 years, like I finally realized that you're a useful person to have around. Like, it's like, no kidding, dude. No kidding.
Right.
Oh man. So some people might get tripped up on that word divination, and like, what does it mean?
In a previous lesson, I talked about this word magic in the Bible and what it actually meant, and Ellen White's use of the word magic. So let's touch on this for just a second here, because I find it very interesting. After we've just dealt with the fertility in all of the women in the previous story, now we come to the goats and sheep, and now we're kind of hitting that same thing again. We're still talking about fertility and all this, but I really appreciated what Dukan wrote here. He said, okay, I'm going to just quote him here. Jacob's husbandry, his husbandry method may appear to draw on superstition and magic, but he proceeded under divine guidance. He was informed by the divine vision. And then he goes on to explain, quote, these three trees, and you'll read that in the story, these three trees contain chemical substances. And then he goes to quote one more time that the selection of the rams that had already had certain recessive genes. Now, I'm just giving snippets here for anybody who wants to take the time to read this. But the bottom line is, we're not talking about anything magical. We are talking about something that we understand that trees do contain in terms of chemical substances. and it would appear that he had been enlightened perhaps by the Lord in terms of how to raise the sheep, paying close attention to the recessive genes and what that would be, how that would result in the end. So it takes
Okay.
all this mystique out of the picture.
Yeah, I mean, and I know for skeptics, the genetics here is a huge stumbling block for some of them. They just don't understand. Like eating a certain branch is not going to do anything. At least not, certainly not anytime soon. It's going to produce these physical changes in them. But I think that word divination, again, usually it's a negative word in the Bible. But and usually some of these other translations just translate experience. It can mean that occasionally. It can mean that, but usually it means divination. But I think this is a recognition from Laban that he sees that Jacob is being blessed by God here, and it's not just he's smart with sheep, although certainly he is. Certainly he understands things about sheep that Laban doesn't. But it's also he sees there's a divine hand in Jacob's intelligence, in his stewardship, in his shepherdship. So I don't know that he's like getting into some witchcraft or anything like that. I don't think that's what's being implied here. I just think it's like I see the signs. I see the holy signs, on you that you're somebody who's being blessed right now with these sheep, and so I recognize that I'm not blind. And so why would you not want to keep the magic boy around? Anybody would.
Well, and when we have evidence, of course, in the life of Solomon, how God has blessed him with wisdom. We have in the lives of Noah and Moses, how God blessed these individuals with knowledge to build a boat, to build a sanctuary.
Right.
So I think this is just another picture of God intervening with someone who is key to the lineage to the Messiah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So they make a deal about how they're going to leave, And what's interesting is that even after all this time, you sense that the relationship between Jacob and Laban is still not one of perfect trust, because they're trying to figure out how do we disentangle our families from each other and our wealth from each other. And so Jacob's like, I don't want you to hand me anything as if you gave me gifts, but do this. I'm going to keep tending your flocks, watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today, remove the speckled and spotted sheep and the dark lambs and all that, and goats. They will be my wages. And so that way you can tell what's mine and what's yours. Okay. And so Laban says, agreed. But you see how they're both very careful here that I get what's mine and you keep what's yours. And we want to make sure that we don't get one sheep, going with me that belongs to you. It's like, this is usually not how family members talk to each other, right? This is in our experience. It's usually not, if someone takes an extra $5, it's like, yeah, go with it. Your family, who cares? This is not that case. They're very concerned about who owns what. And I think that's probably what happens when a relationship begins with deception. It's hard to overcome that. But again, this is a business thing. This is a business thing as well. And so, anyways, that's all I really want to say about this lesson. I think it's worth pointing out Jacob's shrewdness here at the end, and saying, I want these animals. And then, of course, he does something to create more of those animals. So he's deceived by Laban, and he ends by deceiving Laban. So, he had the Bethel experience, but you just got to wonder a little bit here. Is this the thing that God wanted him to do here? I don't know. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being shrewd, but, is there a difference between being shrewd and being deceptive or deceitful?
I like at the end of the lesson how the lesson brought out the phrase that we have a young man here who has been on a very long detour. And when I read that, I was thinking of, just like Grandpa Abraham, long detour.
Yep, long detour. Oh, very good. Well, guys, I hope that you can take something out of this lesson. And we do Sabbath School Boot Camp, of course, for you teachers and front row type students, so that you guys can have excellent Sabbath School classes. Jim and I are both very passionate about this. We want to see engaging, interesting Sabbath School classes where people come to grow, not just to repeat slogans and talking points from Adventism or Christianity, but to grow, to learn something, to deepen their knowledge of the Bible and their relationship with God, to have that Bethel experience themselves. So we want to help you by just getting those juices flowing if you're teaching or you're part of that class, and just give you some things to chew on here that maybe you might not have encountered in some book. And so that's going to do it for this week. We are going to see you next week with some more Genesis action. We'll see you then.